Montana Territory, spring of 1882, just east of the Crazy Mountains. The young woman who stepped down from the stagecoach wore a man's hat pulled low over her face, trousers that hung loose on her frame, and a coat clearly borrowed from someone else. But it wasn't her clothes that made the driver pause. It was the name she gave him, Ruthie Abernathy. She spoke it with a hard edge in her voice, like she had drilled it into her tongue 100 times before. She had not always been Ruthie Abernathy. Her true name was one she had buried forever, not after what her father had done. The town of Cold Creek was barely more than a scatter of buildings. One general store, a paint flake saloon, and a blacksmith who kept to himself. She strode past all of it, clutching the satchel on her shoulder as if it carried her pride inside. She stopped only at the livery, where horses drowsed in the afternoon light and a man in a long brown duster leaned against a fence post, chewing a stalk of grass. His eyes lifted when she came near, steady and unflinching. "You the one they call Quad Armstrong?" she asked. "I am," he answered, slow and even. "And you're Ruthie Abernathy?" She nodded, though the name still felt like a coat not yet fitted to her shoulders. "I heard you need someone to mend the north pasture fences." "I do," he said, "but I thought you were a man." "I'm not," she replied flatly. For a moment the air went still. Quad studied her, not with hunger or scorn like other men, but as if reading something written faintly across her skin. "You running from something?" Her throat tightened. "Someone." He nodded once and pushed off the post. "All right, you can work. But if you're carrying my name, I'll see that it's worth carrying." Her stomach nodded. "What do you mean?" "You signed into town under my name. Folks will talk. Might as well give them something honest to talk about." And, just like that, it was settled. She had taken his name to escape her father, and the cowboy had looked her square in the eye and promised to make it mean something. The first week was rough. Her palms blistered from the wire. Her back ached from bending, but Quad never treated her as fragile. He showed her once how to string fence, then left her to learn by doing. They didn't talk much at first. Silence stretched wide between them, broken only by the creak of saddle leather and wind threading the pines. Yet Ruthie noticed things, how he always rode just behind her on narrow trails, watching her back. How extra jerky would appear in her saddlebag or beside her bedroll without a word. One night, after hours of clearing brush, they sat by a fire behind the barn. Ruthie peeled off her gloves and stretched her sore fingers. Quad handed her a tin cup of coffee. "You got kin anywhere?" he asked. "No," she said. "Only one once. He wasn't the kind you keep." Quad's gaze went to the flames. "Mine's buried near Bozeman. Ma, Pa, and my little brother. Fever took them all one winter." She looked at him, startled. "You were just a boy." 14, he said. She stared into the fire. "I was 13 when my mother died. After that, my father changed, tried to own me, tried to sell me like livestock." Quad turned his head slowly toward her. "I ran," she said, voice steady. "He's hunting me. I left Missouri with a stolen coat, a false name, and nothing else." Silence stretched again. Then Quad's voice, low and firm. "You've got someone now." She lifted her eyes, startled. "I don't say things I don't mean," he added. "You carry my name, that matters to me." Ruthie blinked quickly, heat pricking behind her eyes. No one had ever given her something without demanding payment. But Quad had, and it felt solid, real. The days passed and spring softened the land. Her body toughened, her hands hardened with calluses. She could ride from sunrise to dusk without faltering, and she knew the rhythm of Quad's gait as surely as her own breathing. One afternoon, while crossing a ridge, they saw smoke rising from the valley. Quad reined in his horse. "That's no campfire," he said. "Come on." They thundered downhill, hooves pounding the ground. At the source, they found a wagon overturned, its canvas burned to ash. Two children, barefoot and soot-streaked, crouched near a tree stump in shock. A boy and a girl, no more than 6 or 7. The girl gripped her brother's hand until his knuckles turned white. Quad dismounted first, moving slow. "We're not here to hurt you," he said. The girl's eyes were wild. "Bandits, they took our ma and pa." Ruthie crouched low. "What are your names?" "Beth," the girl whispered. "This is my brother Billy." Ruthie reached out her hand. "Come with us. You'll be safe." The children hesitated, then Beth nodded. Ruthie gathered them, both into her arms. They trembled against her. Quad's gaze lingered on the smoldering wreckage. "We'll ride double, get them food and water, then we'll figure the rest." They brought the children back to Cold Creek. Ruthie stayed with them in the loft while Quad fetched blankets and stew. That night, Beth curled against Ruthie's side, and Billy clutched her arm. "They're alone, just like I was," Ruthie whispered when Quad stepped closer. "You're not alone anymore," he answered. "And neither are they," she thought, lowering her gaze to the children. In the days that followed, Ruthie and Quad shared the burden of caring for them. Ruthie soothed Beth to sleep with soft songs, combing her hair in gentle strokes. Quad kept Billy occupied, showing him how to whittle a fox from a stick so his thoughts would not drift back to the fire. In those quiet days, they built more than shelter or meals. They found a rhythm, a way of standing side by side that felt as natural as breathing. One evening, the four of them gathered around the fire. Billy slept against Quad's shoulder while Beth dozed in Ruthie's lap. "She called me Mama today," Ruthie murmured. Quad's eyes found hers, deep and warm. "You'd make a good one." A faint smile touched her lips. "And you? Would you make a good father?" "I'd give it everything. Always." Ruthie met his gaze, firelight dancing between them. "What are we doing, Quad?" He leaned closer. "We're building something, you, me, and these two. We didn't plan it, but it feels right." Her heartbeat quickened. "It does." He reached for her hand, his grip steady and sure. "You took my name to hide," he said. "But I want you to keep it, not from fear, not because you must, but to belong." Tears welled in her eyes. "I want to belong." "Then stay," he told her. "Stay with me." Her nod trembled with emotion. "Yes." And under the wide stars of Cold Creek, Ruthie Abernathy stopped running. She had once borrowed his name to escape her father, but now she carried it with pride, because Quad Armstrong had made it worth carrying. That year, the thaw came slow. Meltwater pooled in the hollows and turned pasture roads to heavy mud, though the high ridges dried first. Most mornings, Quad led Ruthie and the children up there to let the horses stretch and the little ones breathe freer air. Beth no longer clung to Ruthie's skirts, though she still reached for her hand whenever the wind howled. Billy had taken to carrying a stick like a rifle, following Quad with grave determination. One Tuesday, with clouds piled high and the scent of wet pine drifting through the air, Ruthie stood at the wooden table Quad had built against the barn's lean-to. She sliced strips of venison for drying, her movements precise, the blade steady, in her grip. She had never held a hunting knife before Montana, but her hands no longer shook when faced with new tools. Quad came to stand beside her, brushing wood dust from his sleeves. "You're cutting that meat like it wronged you." She didn't look up. "Easier to keep working. My legs itch if I stand still too long." He folded his arms, studying the sure angle of her wrist. "I've seen that in men who've been hunted. They forget how to sit still even when danger's gone." She lowered the knife, not in fear but in reflection. "I still dream. Not of him. Just doors I can't lock." He nodded slowly. "Ever wonder what you'd do if you saw him again?" She set the blade down with care, wiped her hands on her apron. "I used to think I'd freeze. Now I believe I'd look him in the eye and call him by his name." Quad's gaze lingered before shifting toward the hills. "Beth says she wants to learn her letters." "She told me the same," Ruthie said. "I thought about carving a slate board from that pine plank by the coop." She wants to be like you. Ruthie's mouth curved faintly. Poor girl's aiming low. No, he said, firm. She's aiming true. Later that afternoon, Ruthie sat with Beth beneath the cottonwoods behind the barn. She scratched letters into the dirt with a twig, and Beth traced them carefully with her finger, brow furrowed in focus. Billy napped nearby in the grass, his small hand curled around his stick rifle. When Beth tired, Ruthie rose and dusted her skirts. Turning toward the house, she spotted Quad leading a stranger down the slope from the main trail. The man's coat was too fine for Cold Creek, his boots without dust. He held his reins like someone who rode only when necessary. Ruthie stiffened, her hand instinctively resting on Beth's shoulder. Quad lifted his hand in reassurance. It's all right. He's a circuit judge. Name's Alden, passing through from Livingston. The judge dismounted with a groan, stretching stiff joints. Heard you've got a solid roof and a place to rest. I'd be obliged. You're welcome to the guest room, Quad said. We've stew and bread, if you don't mind children at the table. I was a father before I was a judge, Alden replied. That suits me just fine. That evening, they ate at the table Ruthie had scrubbed earlier that morning. Alden spoke with calm ease, asking Beth what stories she liked, letting Billy chatter about the fox he'd spotted near the creek. Ruthie kept mostly quiet, watching the judge's eyes. He didn't seem the sort to pry too deeply, yet she measured every answer with care. When the children were settled in the loft, Quad and Ruthie joined Alden on the porch. The judge lit a thin cigar, leaning back with a sigh. You two married? He asked, not unkindly. Ruthie hesitated. I carry his name. Alden gave a slow nod. That means something here. Quad leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. She took it to outrun trouble. I told her I'd make it worth carrying. You have, Ruthie said softly, before she could stop herself. Alden tapped ash from his cigar, then make it right. I've got the power to sign a license, Alden said. Wouldn't take more than a few words. Ruthie's pulse hammered in her throat. Quad's eyes were on her, not pressing, just waiting, quiet and steady. I didn't come here seeking marriage, she said softly. I came looking for peace. You've found it now, he replied. This only makes it harder for anyone to strip it from you. She studied her hands, rough and strong. She thought of Beth's small fingers twined in hers, of Billy's laughter when he caught a grasshopper in the grass. Then she raised her eyes to Quad. I want it, she said. Not to hide, to build. Quad rose and stretched out his hand. Then come with me. They walked to the porch edge where the moonlight touched the dirt. Alden followed, solemn as a preacher. He opened his ledger and read in a quiet tone, without show. Ruthie spoke her name and his name again, and this time it stayed, it rooted. Quad said only, I will keep you safe. I will keep you close. Alden scratched his signature with a flourish. Alden scratched his signature with a flourish. Done and done. Ruthie lifted her face to Quad's. His calloused hand touched her cheek, and his lips pressed to hers. Gentle, certain, like sealing a vow. Inside, Beth stirred and whispered, Mama. Ruthie smiled against Quad's shoulder. Yes, sweetheart, I'm here. By mid-June, wild roses scented the gullies, and frost had slipped away into memory. Ruthie hung, laundry on a line between two aspens, her hands quick with the clothespins. Behind her, Beth chased a moth through the grass while Billy crouched by the fence, watching ants march off with the crumbs of a dropped biscuit. Near sundown, Quad came back from the south pasture, shirt damp at the collar, hat pulled low. Swung down slow, stretching his shoulders, then led the mare toward the pump. Ruthie watched from the porch, a basin of cooled water and a folded cloth on her lap. You're favoring your right leg, she said as he passed. Stepped in a hole past the bluff, he answered. Didn't roll it, just jarred it. She lifted the basin. Come sit. Let me look. He hesitated, then mounted the porch steps and eased onto the bench beside her. She knelt at his feet, unbuckled his boot and slid it off carefully. His sock was damp, the ankle flushed, though not swollen. "You'll be stiff tomorrow," she said, dabbing the cloth against his skin. He watched her hands, voice softer than usual. "You notice things others pass over." She wrung the cloth and laid it across his ankle. "Noticing's what kept me alive. I learned to read moods like weather, a slammed door, the way a hand curls on a table." Quad's jaw tightened. "You don't have to do that here." "I know, but sometimes I still listen for footsteps that aren't there." He touched her shoulder gently. "Then let me be the sound you trust." She lifted her eyes to him, the sunset gilding his face in copper light. "You already are." Later that night, while Ruthie swept the kitchen floor, Quad stepped into the doorway holding a folded sheet. "A letter came through the postwriter, addressed to me, but I think it's meant for you." She took it carefully. The paper was thick. The ink smudged along one edge. Her breath caught as she opened it. Her father's handwriting, unmistakable. The words seemed polite, but underneath ran a sharp edge. He claimed regret, spoke of misunderstanding, asked after her whereabouts. Ruthie folded the letter before finishing. "He doesn't know where I am." Quad didn't push. "Want me to burn it?" "No," she said. "I'll keep it, to remind me what I won't return to." He nodded. "We'll lock it in, the cellar chest. Safe if you ever want it, but not where it can reach you." The next week, they rode into Cold Creek for supplies. Beth held Ruthie's hand as they passed the mercantile window, while Billy darted ahead, shouting out the names of tools hanging on the smith's wall. Inside, Ruthie chose fabric for curtains and a tin of licorice for the children's reward. Jar. Quad stayed near the counter, speaking with the storekeeper about nails and seed corn. Ruthie wandered to the back where jars of preserves were stacked. A woman there sorted them into a basket. Her nose was pinched, and a kerchief tied too, tight around her chin. "You're the one who came on the stage last spring," the woman said without turning. Ruthie kept silent. "You took Quad Armstrong's name before you wed him. People wondered about that." Ruthie met her gaze squarely. "I reckon folks have better things to wonder over now." The woman sniffed. "You brought 2 orphans, under his roof. That's a heavy burden." Ruthie stepped closer. "He doesn't carry it alone." The woman dropped her eyes first. Outside, Ruthie found Quad fastening the last of the goods to the wagon. His glance caught hers, reading, her face like he always did. "You all right?" "Yes," she said. "Some folks still think shadows belong to them even when you've stepped out of them." He nodded. "They'll see in time." As they rode home, Beth leaned her head against Ruthie's arm. "Can I have a dress like yours someday?" "You'll have one better," Ruthie said, brushing a curl from her forehead. "One you choose yourself." Billy stirred beside Quad. "Can I have a rifle when I'm big?" "If you learn to care for it proper," Quad replied, said. "It's not the holding that makes a man, it's the keeping." That night, after the children had gone quiet in the loft, Ruthie stood at the edge of the porch watching the moon rise. Quad joined her, 2 coffee mugs in hand. He passed her one and leaned against the post. "I've been thinking," he said after a long stretch of quiet, "about carving a second room onto the house, one for the children." "They're growing," Ruthie sipped from her mug. "They are, and maybe a small shed out back for the tools, give a space inside." "You see this as home now," she said, not as a question. "I see this as ours," he said. She turned toward him, the moonlight tracing the line of his jaw. "I want to plant a row of beans along the south fence, and sunflowers for Beth. She says they look like smiling faces." He smiled, not with his mouth, but with his whole bearing. "Then we'll do that." Ruthie reached for his hand. "I used to think names were only for hiding behind, but now I know they can be something more." "They can be a beginning," Quad said. She laced her fingers through his. "Then let's keep building." The first morning of July dawned with a dry wind from the east and the kind of brittle heat that cracked fence posts and curled the edges of porch boards. Ruthie stood in the corn rows with her hands cupped around a stalk, listening to the rustle of leaves like paper rubbed together. The soil was half dust already, and the river had dropped a hand's width since last week. Quad knelt a short ways off, one knee in the dirt, checking the line of beans. He didn't speak until he'd straightened, wiped his palms against his trousers, and looked toward the sky. "We'll need to dig deeper in the well," he said. "If it stays this dry another week, even the cattle will feel it." Ruthie brushed sweat from her temple with the back of her wrist. "I'll help after supper. I've got the rhythm of the pump now." Quad's brow lifted slightly. "I was thinking of hiring one of the Campbell boys from downriver." "You can hire whoever you like," she said, bending to pull a weed from between the corn shoots. "But I'm not letting you do it alone." He watched her a moment longer, then gave a nod. "All right, we'll start tomorrow." Inside the house, Beth was sewing buttons into a scrap of muslin, tongue caught between her teeth. Billy had taken to shadowing the milk cow with a tin pail, convinced he could manage a full milking if he just kept trying. Ruthie took the basin from the table and brought it out to the porch, where she began peeling potatoes with the small knife Quad had given her after their wedding. "Reverend Clay stopped by while you were at the north fence yesterday," Quad said, as he stepped onto the porch with a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. "Asked if we'd bring the children to the town gathering on Sunday." Ruthie's knife paused halfway through a peel. "I haven't set foot in that chapel." "I know," he said. "He said there'll be bread and music. Nothing formal, just neighbors." She worked the blade again, slow and even. "Beth might like the music. Billy will go wherever she does." Ruthie glanced up. "You want to go? I want them to feel like they belong here, and I want you to see that Cold Creek's not just the place you came to hide in. It's the place we're making." She nodded once. "Then we'll go." The gathering was held beneath the cottonwoods near the creek's bend, where someone had strung bunting from tree to tree and set out planks atop barrels for tables. Beth wore a dress Ruthie had sewn from the muslin scrap, and Billy had his hair combed for once, though it didn't stay that way. Ruthie slipped her hand into Quad's as they walked the path from the wagon. It was the first time she'd done it in front of others, and he gave her fingers a quiet squeeze. They were greeted with cautious warmth, nods, a few smiles. Some held stares. Ruthie kept her chin lifted and her eyes forward. Beth ran ahead toward the sound of a fiddle. Billy followed at her heels. Reverend Clay found them near the cider jugs. "You've done well by those children," he said. "They look steadier." "They are," Ruthie replied. "They just needed time." He studied her face a moment. "You look steadier too." Later, while Ruthie helped slice pie into squares, a woman with a faded shawl approached the table and set down a loaf of bread. Her eyes were narrow but not cruel. "I was wrong about you," she said without ceremony. Ruthie didn't look up from her slicing. People often are. The woman released a breath and left. When the sun dipped low and the fiddler struck up a reel, Beth tugged at Ruthie's skirt. "Dance with me." Ruthie hesitated, then glanced toward Quad. He stepped forward and held out his hand. "How about the three of us?" They danced in a crooked circle, Beth's laughter ringing out each time she stumbled and Quad caught her. Billy clapped near the edge of the gathering, eyes wide, face flushed. By the time they reached home, the children had fallen asleep side by side in the wagon bed, heads resting on a folded quilt. Ruthie carried Beth inside while Quad lifted Billy. They tucked them into the loft without waking them. On the porch, Ruthie leaned against the railing. The moon was high, casting silver across the pasture. Quad joined her, their shoulders brushing. "I didn't think I'd ever feel welcome anywhere," she said after a long silence. "You weren't meant to feel welcome," he said. "You were meant to feel rooted." She turned to face him. "You've given me more than a name. You've given me a place to stand." Quad reached for her hand, calloused palm warm against hers. "You're not standing behind me, Ruthie. You're standing beside me." "I know that now," she said, "and I won't forget it." They stayed like that until the wind shifted and the scent of pine rose from the hills. cool and clean. Behind them, the house stood quiet and whole. The walls, they'd built together, holding steady against the dark. The well was deeper now, dug clear past the shale layer, its rope and bucket newly fitted, the crank handle sanded smooth from Ruthie's palms. The work had been long, 12 days of sweat and sore shoulders, but the water came up clear again, and the cattle drank deep without hesitation. The beans had begun to flower, and the corn had put on height, yellow, green, and eager. On a late D&D afternoon, thick with the buzz of insects, Ruthie stood beneath the lean-to, sewing patches into Billy's trousers. Quad sat nearby with a whetstone and his hunting knife, sliding the blade across the stone in slow, even strokes. The children were off with the Campbell boys, gathering choke cherries by the riverbank. Ruthie had sent them with biscuits and strict instructions to be back before dusk. "You ever think about the kind of man you'd have married if none of the rest had happened?" Quad asked without looking up. She tied off the thread and bit it clean. "Once or twice, I figured it'd be the kind who wanted silence more than company, the kind who liked a still house." "That what you wanted?" "I thought I did." She folded the trousers and set them aside. "But I didn't know what it looked like to be loved without being possessed." Quad set down the knife. "And now?" She glanced over. "Now I know love isn't something taken. It's something lived beside." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a quiet contentment in his eyes. "I've been thinking about building something more permanent for the children. A schoolhouse, maybe. Cold Creek's growing." Ruthie lifted her eyebrows. "And who would teach in that schoolhouse?" "There's a woman I know," he said, voice low and warm. "She's sharp with numbers and firm with runaways, and she's better with children than she admits." She smiled soft and slow. "If you build it, I'll fill it." That night, a storm rolled in from the west. It started with a hush, the kind that made animals still and air sit heavy. Ruthie stood on the porch watching the sky bruise purple, lightning flickering between cloud banks. She stepped down and pulled the gate latch, making sure it was secure. Quad came out with a lantern and held it toward the barn. "Let's bring the mare in, she hates thunder." They crossed the yard together, boots sinking just slightly into dampening soil. Inside the barn, the mare stamped nervously, ears twitching. Ruthie rubbed her neck while Quad checked the stall latch and laid down fresh straw. Rain began to tap, the roof in steady rhythm. As they turned to leave, Ruthie paused. "You ever get the feeling you're standing exactly where you were meant to be?" Quad looked around the barn. The weathered beams, the clean tools, the hay stacked neat to the rafters. "I never did until I stood beside you." The storm passed by morning. The sun rose clean over the hills and the fields glistened with rain and washed green. Ruthie woke early and braided Beth's hair while the girl hummed tunelessly. Billy came, down the ladder with a bruised elbow and a proud grin, claiming he'd climbed the cottonwood behind the barn and seen elk tracks along the northern ridge. That afternoon, Reverend Clay rode out to the homestead with a parcel of books tied in a flour sack. He handed them to Ruthie without ceremony. "Figured you might want these old primers, some arithmetic, 2 volumes of poetry." Ruthie thumbed through the worn pages. "These are good. You'll do right by them," he said, "and by this town." Quad offered him water and a place to rest, but the Reverend shook his head. "I've got 2 sick babies up near Cotton Hollow, but I'll be back when the schoolhouse is raised." As the summer waned, the house grew fuller, not with noise but with rhythm. Ruthie rose before the sun and baked bread while the children fed the hens. Quad worked the pastures and brought in timber from the ridge. On Sundays, they rode into town as a family, and Ruthie began teaching letters to a handful of children beneath the cottonwoods using a chalkboard salvaged from the old mining office. One evening, as cicadas rasped in the scrub brush and the sky turned a deep velvet blue, Ruthie found Quad near the fence line, hammering in the last of the new posts. She brought him a tin cup of cool water and leaned beside him. "There's something I've been wanting to ask," she said, watching the horizon. He wiped his brow and looked over. "Go on. When you said I could keep your name, did you mean it forever? Not just for safety or shelter, but for standing beside you? Come, whatever comes." He set the hammer down gently in the grass. I meant it every way a man can mean something. I meant it like home. She stepped close and took his hand. Then let's never speak of the past again. Not because it's shameful, but because it's over. He nodded, pulled her against his chest. Then, we'll speak only of what we're building. They stood together as the sun dipped low, the last light catching the tops of the hills like fire. Years passed and the house grew with them. The schoolhouse went up before the first snowfall, and Ruthie taught a dozen children by the time the snow. Next spring, bloom arrived. Beth learned to write her name in steady letters and took to sketching plants in the margins of her workbook. Billy helped Quad mend fence and learned to ride with a rope slung across his saddle horn. Ruthie and Quad planted fruit trees behind the barn and watched them take root. They carved their initials into the side of the well, not for memories, it's okay, but to mark the place where something had begun. They never spoke of Missouri again. That life had ended the day Ruthie stepped off the stagecoach. What came after was quieter, deeper. It was made of shared glances across a supper table, of children's laughter echoing through the valley, of hands held in sleep and in storm. It was made of love, not spoken often, but carried in every act. And it was enough, more than enough. It was joy.